Wolfgang Munchau. I on the train from New York City here this morning. I read the Financial Times from cover to cover, and there were a number of really fascinating articles. But this, I mentioned Angela Merkel at the end of my last rant, and this piece by Wolfgang Munchau, it's titled "5 Concurrent Crises Push Europe into the Realm of Chaos" over at the Financial Times today. And he notes, no one in Germany is quicker to notice a shift in the public mood than Horst Seehofer. He's the head of the CSU, the conservative Bavarian sister party to Ms. Merkel's Christian Democrats. And he points out that Merkel's ratings are falling. This guy who is considerably to her right is rising. In fact, he says, my reading of the situation is that the refugee crisis, perhaps more than any other single event, will end up reducing Germany's room for maneuver. He said, he's quoting Simon Tilford from the Center for European Reform, or paraphrasing him. He says, there's no way, Wolfgang Munchau says, there's no way the Eurozone will be able to shrug off the global downturn. And by the way, there was a really good article about how China's real GDP growth over the last decade or two is probably a lot lower than the 7% they've been saying. And the way they get there is by manipulating their inflation numbers, the inflation adjuster number. So let's say the economy grows by 9%, but inflation was 2%. So you say, okay, you got 7% growth. Well, what if inflation was actually 4%, but they only reported it as 2%? So if it was really 4%, it grew by 9%. That means you actually had 5% growth, right? 9 minus 4 equals 5. Which is what this one article. So anyhow, back to this, and so his point, the point is that China is slowing down. The world is slowing down. We talked last week and the week before about emerging markets. Everybody's freaking out about so-called emerging markets. There's been a huge move to disinvest in them. People moving out of third world countries. So he says the Eurozone. He says there's no way the Eurozone can shrug off the global downturn, because its post-crisis recovery strategy rests on net exports. In other words, Europe is running a 3.5% of GDP export surplus, right? We run a $600 billion a year export deficit. We buy more than we sell, which is why 1/7 of America is now owned by foreigners. Because after we borrow money from China, and then we buy iPhones from China, and now Foxconn in China and the billionaires who own it have our money. And what are they going to buy with that? Well, hey, let's buy the Wilshire or the Waldorf, excuse me. I mean, not that they're the ones who bought the Waldorf, but you get the point. You can only spend dollars ultimately at the end of the day in the United States. I mean, yes, you can spend them over the short term anywhere in the world that'll take them. So anyhow, he says, this is going to be a problem. He says it's generally unwise for large economies such as the Eurozone to depend on beggar-thy-neighbor type policies. Now that neighbor, the rest of the world, has fallen sick and there's no plan B. And he points out that the refugee crisis is going to cost Germany a lot of money and it's going to produce a small deficit. And then to his point, which I explained before the break, but it's worth restating in the time in Wolfgang's words, quote, but Germany imposed on itself a constitutional law that enforces budgetary balance over the economic cycle. Once the surpluses are gone, the political and legal room for discretionary policy action will have disappeared. To put it more crudely, the Germans have decided to spend the surplus on the refugees, not on Greece. And by the way, and I will add, once they have spent it on the refugees instead of Greece, they're going to be in a whole world of trouble because, a country that cannot run a budget deficit, a country that can't print its own money. And this is one of the big advantages of having your own sovereign currency. Well, Germany has always, even though the German mark is gone, they've always felt like, hey, we're the strongest economy in Europe. The euro is actually the Deutschmark. So everybody has to have a balanced budget, and we will too, just to show y'all, because we're the strongest guys. Well, they were until they took 500,000 refugees, and they're heading toward 1 million. So look out. There's not a whole lot of political, therefore, to what I'm telling you. This is more like, this is stuff you need to know, right? Just kind of keep it on your horizon, on your radar screen.